Hello, my name is Dr. Sheik and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I want to spend some time to talk about mental health, specifically mental health in the Black community, but mental health overall. Hopefully you can get useful information out of each and every one of these videos. Today we're going to have a conversation about something that's probably difficult to discuss and most people shy away from in dealing with mental health in general. Today we're going to have a conversation about suicide. First, I want to talk about how I was first made aware of suicide. This happened in probably about the 6th or 7th grade. One of my classmates, we learned, tried to overdose with Tylenol. We found out that she was hospitalized. And she did this because her boyfriend had broken up with her and started dating someone else. Or, well, at least that's what we thought. That's what we believed. And in my child mind, my 6th or 7th grade mind, I made sense of it by saying, like, I kind of understand it. Okay, because when someone breaks up with you, it hurts. But at the same time, I was like, he broke up with you for someone who is way too tall and sometimes musty. Let me be really clear. I have absolutely no clue if this young lady was musty at all, but that helped make me make sense of it in my child's mind. The school never actually talked about it. I don't think our parents were ever notified. We never, as students or in the class, ever talked about it. Everyone just kind of moved on. No one outside of this young girl's family or friends or the people she trusted actually knew what was going on with this young girl. But somehow we found out about it and we kind of just moved on. The next time I was made aware or had to actually deal with suicide, or someone who was dealing with suicidal thoughts, was probably decades later, when a family member of mine was going through menopause, as well as had made a couple of abrupt changes in her life. And we don't actually give a lot of space to process or deal with the emotions that come with change. Even if it's a change that we want, it's going to come with some level of emotion because there is going to be a change to your normal. So you have to make adjustments or leave space to make those adjustments and understand that it's going to be, maybe the likelihood of you having some negative emotions will be high because of those changes. So there may be some fear, there may be some anxiety, there are going to be some things associated with those changes and emotions associated with those changes that you have to give space for. During this time, she was dealing with hormonal changes as well as life changes. And at the same time, I was still working in corporate IT. I didn't know if I wanted to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or go to medical school or graduate school. But somehow I knew to get her to the emergency room. I knew in the emergency room there would be either a social worker or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, all on staff that could help her with not only the suicidal thoughts, but as well as possibly getting her medication or something to help stabilize the hormonal changes that were happening due to menopause. Luckily for us, her suicidal thoughts started to dissipate and de-escalate while we were there. She was no longer having those thoughts, so she was released from the hospital. Later on in life, I had a different experience with suicide when I was in a relationship with someone who had suicidal thoughts. His thoughts were more related to depression, not a hormonal imbalance or anything like that, but life circumstances that had him dealing with depression on a major level, major depression. So because of this, I had to rethink how I looked at suicide as well as dealt with suicide, because one, I never wanted him to feel like he was a burden to me if he needed to talk about how he was feeling or needed to have a moment to deal with his own emotions. So I never wanted him to feel like a burden to me. But at the same time, I didn't want me to feel like I could somehow control how he responded or dealt with his suicidal thoughts. Sometimes we get in this space or in this place where we feel like we can either prevent or somehow keep someone from engaging in suicidal behaviors. Let me be really clear. The only person you have 100% control over in this life is yourself, and that is it. So I wanted to make sure I never felt like I had any level of control over the choices and decisions he made. Just like many other relationships, this one didn't work out, and that's okay. It happens. To the best of my knowledge, I believe he's still doing well and he's fine. But the relationship between he and I didn't work out, and that is 100% okay. More recently, I've had a female friend who let me know that she first started having thoughts about suicide in childhood due to some things that she was experiencing and going through in her life at that time. And she had started to have those thoughts again now because of the life circumstances that she was currently dealing with. I also had a male friend who was dealing with chronic suicidal thoughts, who had nearly engaged in suicidal behaviors. So being able to talk to them about those thoughts and deal with my own fears and how to handle those conversations in the moment, as well as I had one business associate and a really good friend that's almost like a sister to me let me know that there were people in their lives that had died by suicide. One had a brother who died by suicide, and the other was their cousin. So I felt like this was a good time to have this conversation. So today I want to have this conversation by focusing first on the facts and the statistics. My data, or these data that I'm going to talk about, are coming from the CDC. And according to the CDC, there are 8.7 deaths per 100,000 by suicide in the Black community. I imagine there's probably someone out there saying 8.7 per 100,000 doesn't seem like a lot. But I can guarantee you that one is too many for someone's loved one. What they also stated, according to the CDC, is that the rate of deaths by suicide started to decrease between 2018 and 2020, but started to experience like a drastic increase around 2021. I suspect, an educated guess, that this had a lot to do with the changes that were associated with COVID. We kind of didn't leave a lot of space to process that. We kind of said, yeah, we're on lockdown. Everything was shut down for about 2 years, but now let's just go back to normal. Well, unfortunately, that may not be the case. We have to identify what the normal looks like for us now. And with that being said, we didn't take into account that we lost a lot of social interactions during that 2-year period. We were trying to communicate through Zoom, and there were limited social interactions. And for as much as social media and Zoom can bring, it cannot bring that same feeling that you have, the emotions that come with interacting with someone in a face-to-face setting. And even if we don't like people, as humans, we actually thrive off of social interactions. Even when we're introverted, we actually thrive in those arenas, but we will have to reset at some point. But back to the data. And right now I'm going to be looking at the data between 2010 and 2020. Now, it was reported by the CDC that between 2010 and 2020, there were approximately 29,900 deaths in the Black community due to suicide. Of those 29,000, 24,000 of those were by deaths were of Black men, which lets me know that there's a serious conversation that we need to have in our community about Black male mental health. At the same time, there were also 5,000 deaths of Black women by suicide, which also highlights that we need to address mental health as far as Black women are concerned as well. Of the total populations of all ethnicities and races, there were over 480,000 deaths reported during 2010 and 2020. And the data shows that the highest percentages or the highest levels of reported deaths being in the Midwest and Alaska. These data typically don't report a causation. And I imagine that there are studies out there that are looking at the causes for death tolls by suicide being higher in the Midwest and Alaska, but I didn't actually pull that information. There doesn't seem to be any age difference when it comes to death by suicide. The CDC reported deaths by suicide for those ages 10 to 85 or older. However, those between those 20 years and older account for about 12 per 100,000 deaths by suicide in the overall population. And which we can make the educated guess at that point, the educated assumption that between the ages of 10 and 20, the risk of engaging in suicidal behaviors are less likely, but doesn't mean it won't happen. We typically talk about mental health, but we don't talk about what to do when you encounter someone who is suffering with some type of mental health concern. So let's spend some time talking about the do's and don'ts of mental health. Do. Be willing to have an open, honest, judgment-free conversation about suicide. Be willing to hear what someone has to say. Be willing to take in how they're feeling and hear them with open ears, without judgment and without any preconceived notions of how they're thinking and what they're feeling. When someone is feeling suicidal, some of their statements may sound like, "I'm tired," "This is too much," "If this is all life is about, I don't want to keep doing this." And some people may honestly say, "I want to kill myself. I no longer want to be here anymore. I don't want to do life anymore." Don't be dismissive or diminish how someone is feeling. And what this looks like is, don't say to them, "This is just life. You have to learn to let it go. Everything will get better. You just have to trust the process. Everything will work out." That kind of dismisses and diminishes how they're truly feeling. Because now you're telling them that, you're worried for nothing. All these concerns are for naught. Okay? So be willing to ask someone, "What do you need from me to support you during this time?" Will they always be able to tell you? They may not. But be willing to listen and ask the question before we make an assumption as to what someone needs from us. So be willing to ask. They may just need someone to listen. They may just need someone to try to understand where they're coming from in those moments. And at the same time, they may need someone to help them with the problem-solving process. Because normally when we're at the stage of when we're thinking about harming ourselves, we don't have the mental capacity to think and problem solve. So being able to help someone through that process may be what they need. But be willing to ask. Do not make someone feel guilty, judged, or somehow ashamed or wrong for how they're feeling in the moment. What this can look like, or what this can sound like, can be you saying something such as, "How could you do this to your family? How could you do this to your children? What about how I'm feeling? How could you do this to me?" In those moments, the likelihood of someone being able to process your emotions when their emotions are so heightened and overwhelmed is not likely, and it's probably going to contribute more to them feeling a higher level of guilt and a higher level of burden. So during this time, don't make them feel guilty or give them your emotions to try to handle and hold in that moment. Be willing to call or reach out for help. I need you to know your limitations. Just like I did, or just like I discussed earlier, be willing to drive someone to the emergency room. Be willing to call 988, the crisis line, to get them help. Be willing to call 911 while they're in the home and say, "If this is what's going to happen, I need to reach out for help because I don't know what to do in this moment. So I'm going to call to get you help." So be willing to reach out when you have met your limitation. Do not overreact to someone saying that they're having suicidal thoughts. There are people who have suicidal thoughts on a daily basis. That doesn't mean that they're going to engage in any behaviors to hurt themselves. Doesn't mean they're planning on doing anything. It just means that the thoughts are there for them daily. And if you call the emergency department, or if you send out a wellness check, or if you require them to go to the hospital every time they have or state that they're having suicidal thoughts, the likelihood of them coming to you again when they're having these thoughts are not likely, and they may shut down and not tell you when they're having these experiences and these thoughts. So those are some of the do's and don'ts. Recently, I was listening to a newscast and I overheard someone saying that with Father's Day passing, that being a father was a protective factor. Now, a protective factor is something that decreases the likelihood of someone engaging in suicidal behaviors. And although being a father, being a parent, having children are protective factors, it can also serve as a risk factor. And a risk factor is something that increases the likelihood of someone engaging in suicidal behaviors. And the reason it can be a risk factor is due to parental stress. What this looks like is having to take on all financial burdens, or dealing with those financial burdens and not feeling like you have the resources, or having to take on all of the parenting duties and not having any level of support. Or it could be like a custody dispute that you're going through. Then being a parent and having children can be a risk factor for suicidal behaviors. At the same time, I want to talk about religion. Religion, having a spiritual belief, having some type of belief in something higher than oneself, is a protective factor. However, when we make someone feel guilty or judged for having these thoughts, by making statements such as, you're just not praying hard enough, you've lost faith, you're just not trusting in God anymore, or insert any deity that you believe in, you're just not trusting in them anymore, then now this thing that I used to have as my solace that gave me a sense of hope in these darker times, now feels like a risk and feels like something else I'm doing wrong in my life. So try to refrain making statements that can cause someone to feel like they're further making mistakes in their lives in those moments. Now I want to spend some time focused on the misconceptions that are sometimes associated with suicidal thoughts and suicidal behaviors. First misconception is that suicide is a sign of weakness. This is incorrect. If you've ever heard the story of, or the lived experiences of someone who's gotten to a place where they've had suicidal thoughts or engaged in suicidal behaviors, you could not fathom in your worst nightmares some of the things that they've actually experienced in life and had to go through, and now carry the thoughts and memories with them daily and trying to live life through. So it takes a different level of strength to go through some of the things that they've gone through and to continue to prosper or continue to make life happen for themselves day in and day out. So the idea that suicide is a sign of weakness is just not true. Misconception number 2, suicide demonstrates an act of selfishness or that they don't care. For most people who are having suicidal thoughts or engage in suicidal behaviors, they feel like a burden to those around them. They feel like their loved ones, family or friends would be better off without them. Let's take, for instance, if they were a parent and they have set their family up to receive certain financial benefits once they pass away. They know that now that if I'm no longer here, I now give my family the financial freedom that I couldn't give them while I was living. So now my family is much better without me. It's not that they don't care. Sometimes they care a lot. And in caring a lot, that burden becomes overwhelming for them. And they are trying to figure out how do I do this life without feeling like a burden, without feeling like I'm putting too much emotional stress or financial stress on those I love the most. So it's not that they don't care, and it's not that they're being selfish. It's that they are probably caring a lot in those moments. Misperception or misconception number 3. Suicide is untreatable. Suicide is treatable. The goal for treatment for suicide is not that you get rid of the suicidal thoughts completely, because there is no guarantee that the thoughts will go away. The goal is to help you manage those thoughts when they do occur. The goal is to help you find strategies for managing those overwhelming thoughts before they get to the point where they feel overwhelming, before they get to the point where they feel like you may engage in any suicidal behaviors or harm yourself in any way. The goal in and of itself is to prepare you and to make you more aware of the things that are happening for you that may lead to those suicidal thoughts. And once you become aware, to put strategies into place to help you when that awareness becomes to reality. The goal is to teach you strategies. So when you are aware of when you're aware of those things that may trigger you in certain ways or serve as a risk factor for yourself, you have ways of dealing with those thoughts and those emotions so they don't become overwhelming to the point that you want to engage in suicidal behaviors. Misconception number 4. Suicide attempts and self-harm are just cries for attention. That is not true either. Self-harm can look like cutting, burning, strangulation, or banging your head or other body parts against something to cause some type of harm. And what I've found is that self-harm has purposes. 2 that I'm aware of is 1, it can be a precursor to future suicide attempts, or self-harm serves as a way to distract from the emotional pain. The thing is, emotional pain is hard to identify. You don't always know how to deal with it or what to do with it when it happens. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming that you need to distract in order to feel like you can function. So I can cause this physical pain because this physical pain I know how to deal with. If I need to go to the emergency room, or if I need a Band-Aid, or if I just need to let it take place, it's going to scab over, I'll heal. I know how it started. I know how to handle it. I can handle this physical pain, but this emotional pain, I don't know what to do with. So I'm going to cause this physical pain so I don't have to focus on this emotional pain that feels very damaging and uncomfortable in this moment. Suicide attempts occur when someone's emotions are so overwhelming, the thoughts are so overwhelming that they don't know any other way of handling it in that moment. It just feels like something that is outside of their control in those moments. Neither one of these, whether it be a suicide attempt or self-harm, are cries for attention. Most people would rather people never know that these things ever happen. And be grateful if someone has shared that information with you, because it's not easy to talk about, and it's not something that people typically want attention for. So those are the misconceptions associated that are typically associated with suicidal thoughts and suicidal behaviors. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If I get the opportunity, I will read through them and answer any questions that I can. Please take your time and read the disclaimer at the beginning of this video. If you or anyone you know are having suicidal thoughts or the desire to engage in suicidal behaviors, please call 988, the crisis line, or report to your nearest emergency department. I hope you've learned some information today that you didn't know before that may help you feel prepared for dealing with mental health in a different way. I hope to continue to have these conversations, and in each one of them, you are able to take something away that you didn't know before you came here. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.